So let's get to the point. Why am I even giving this talk? I'm giving this talk because I've spent a lot of time thinking about these kinds of problems. First at google.org, where I led nonprofit investment in computer science education. And then by being the technical advisor to the CEO at GitHub. So interestingly, the google.org one was a very interesting journey. Google wrote into their charter, or when they went public, that they are going to devote 1% of their profits towards social problems, funding the commons. So it's a very interesting thing that corporations are already doing this. And then to do this, how are they going to distribute this 1% of profits? And the 1% of profit can be anywhere from like 80 million to 100 million a year, or maybe 200 million now. And the first thing that they decided to do was figure out one problem. Their problem was, we're going to eradicate polio from the face of the earth, and we're just going to give money to a very innovative researcher, spin up a group, and they'll do polio. Then they moved away to do like, okay, we're just going to write code and write a code that most people won't write. So we're doing things about satellites and climate, so that if there's a disaster relief, so if an earthquake happened somewhere, they would spin satellites to that area so you can have better mapping and stuff like that. And eventually they decided that they're going to just give out grants. And so now what they're doing is just giving out grants. And because they wrote this into their charter, they have to continuously spend this money. And if the solution to the problem happens to be something that requires you to bring a bit of profit into it, they can't fund it. So they've now shackled themselves. So that's the story of what is happening. And most corporations then devolved all of this social good desire into CSR, which is basically they just spend money, do some silly little things, and they happen to be in the media. Oh, they're not evil, they're nice. But it's not perpetually funding the commons. At GitHub is the home of open source. So clearly, GitHub has a deep understanding, or we who worked at GitHub have a deep understanding of what it means to actually have coordination problems in a decentralized industry. Does anybody know what this is? I'm sure everybody here, oh, thank God, yes. The image seen around the world. So we saw this image, I saw this image, and everybody was freaking out. Everybody, we were at GitHub then, and everybody was literally like losing their shit. I was also losing my shit, I'm not even gonna lie. And the reason why we're also excited, I'm not even a physicist, I don't even know why I should care, but it was FOMO. I just like, yay. And then, but it suddenly occurred to me that, oh my God, I couldn't wait to go to work, because I know that a lot of the physics libraries, the AstroPy libraries that everybody uses for Python is all based on open source. And finally, it's like, you know, when you do a certain kind of work, my background is in computer science. I'm an ML person, and I did my PhD at Berkeley, UC Berkeley. And they're like AstroPy people and scientific Python people at Berkeley. But I felt like we were just like our own little weird nerds, and our stuff didn't matter. But these people were talking about it, who are not even like scientists. And I was like, oh my God, it's like your holy shit moment. Like, oh my God, I bet there's some AstroPy people who are like freaking out. And so we looked into it to figure out, actually, what Python libraries had to be combined together to create that image. And if you look closely at this picture, you can read some of the libraries in there. There are probably libraries that some of you have used before, PyTest and things like that. But what was mostly interesting was like, that image was the picture of Dr. Katie. She was the person that her picture was taken. And so people start thinking about all this work is done by one person. And if you know that most of that work is done by software, you know that it's invisible. It was 21,000 plus contributors that contributed to all those libraries to be able to create that image. And as crazy as that is, that's just the tip of the iceberg, because those are the libraries that went into the software. But what about the dependency graph of each of those libraries? Then you go even deeper, and now you're talking about 75,000 plus community contributors to make that image occur. Now, that is a big number to achieve one tiny little thing. And so put that at the back of your mind. But I had never really thought about perpetual funding for open source. Most of us, if you're a developer, you use open source software all the time. And industries, particularly enterprise software, which is what everything that runs the world, 90% of enterprise software is based on open source. So literally the world runs on open source. And I, as a user of open source, never thought about who was writing this software, who was maintaining this software. As an ML person, you just pull the pandas library, you pull the NumPy library. Somehow it's like magic. The libraries exist, you use it. You don't think about whose job it is to deal with it. But I had my aha moment. Somewhere in 2018, I was addicted to Twitter as usual, and I saw this tweet came across my timeline. And the thing that really caught my eye was that statement: vital code is maintained by a small number of people. And so this one is a Python scientific stack, of which most of all the ML that everybody's talking about, the generative AI, all of that stuff, most of that stuff rests on different Python libraries. And the big ones are Matplotlib, NumPy, and Pandas. These are like major libraries. And it is all of 15 people that maintain that library. But the interesting, crazy thing about it is we rely on 15 people to do our science. Without them, there's no Matplotlib, there's no NumPy, there's no Pandas. And this is a scientific Python stack. And there are SciPy conferences like this one. And if they have a conference, more than likely all those 15 people will be at that conference. God forbid there's an earthquake and they all die. Then what happens? I know it sounds quite morbid. I think there was an earthquake today in San Francisco. Let's say it's in San Francisco and the big one hits and ooh, everybody's gone. How do we, not everybody, these 15 people, they all go to the bathroom collapses. How do we resurrect the science? And that freaked me out. That literally freaked me out, because when you're building big production software systems, you build redundancies. And open source doesn't have that redundancy. And most of us just don't even worry about it. We just think some magic fairy somewhere is going to fix it. And the thing that really stuck out to me was the coordination problems that was happening in those packages. Remember now, what does open source mean? It means somebody has a real job, and they come back from their real job. They take care of their family, they cook dinner, their kids go to bed, and they then get up at 10 p.m. and start working on open source till midnight, and then go to bed at 1. So these people are not paid to do this, and that's their everyday life. And most of the time, maintainers, they start this library out of the goodness of their heart. Maybe they're in grad school, and they were trying to solve some problem, and they can't solve that problem, and they finally crack the code. Then they make it open source, and they tell everybody, hey, I finally wrote this thing that can do this. Then we all get excited, and we start using the thing. They have no intentions of being a maintainer. They were just solving one little problem, and now some person is gonna write an issue and be like, this is broken, and I can't finish writing my code because your system is broken. I need this thing fixed because I need to ship this thing. And this person starts feeling the pressure, they run and fix this thing. And then another person writes something else, and another person writes something else, but it's one person, and there's this coordination problem. So let's zoom in on the one in the middle, NumPy. As of 2018, it was downloaded 49 million times. So it's something that people are using a lot of. And the cost of all that work roughly was around 7.5 million. The code base had 285,000 lines and had 564 contributors. 564 contributors. 564 contributors, 6 maintainers. 6 people have to coordinate the work of 560 something. That's like 1 to 100. Most of us work in companies. Who is the manager in this room? Who manages people? Imagine having 100 direct reports and they're all spread all over the world in multiple time zones, and they're all asking you for something. And you're supposed to manage them, and you're not even getting paid. That's what this is. And so that was my aha moment. And so for us, the first things that I wanted to do, before even funding, before even worried about whether they're going to get paid or not, was to help them figure out how they're not going to get burnt out. Just how they're going to manage these coordination problems, how they're not going to get burnt out. So we in Web3, so I know all about coordination problems. And I wrote many memos, built many prototypes to kind of mitigate some of the coordination problems, often using machine learning of just doing things like, when you have an issue, just auto-triage the issue. Have a bot that just auto-triages it, lets you know whether it's something like, is it a bug, is it spam, is it this and that. At least if you do all the triaging, you reduce the amount of work. You start to create some pipelines so things can go easily. Web3, obviously, is coordination problems overload. And Gitcoin exists as a way to help perpetually fund open source. That's their intention. So they've created this system, and it still has challenges. And then corporations like GitHub created something like GitHub sponsors. GitHub sponsors require philanthropy. So you, as a person, if you log into your GitHub profile today and you navigate yourself somehow to GitHub sponsors, you will see all the libraries that you use, and you see the developers who contribute code to those libraries, and then you're asked to sponsor that developer at whatever price, maybe $5, $10, and but it's philanthropy. So that's one thing. As good as that is, it's not a solution. Philanthropy is not going to perpetually fund open source. You need something else at the core that can solve this better. And for me, I think that thing is tokenomics. Because in the context of code, and now I'm being very, very limited. I'm only talking about developers, even though we know that it takes way more than the developers to actually build a library. But let's just limit this conversation to the developers. If developers are writing code, we have a way of figuring out this identity committed this much code to this project. So at least we have some kind of mechanism for tracing the work that they do, which means that you could potentially capture all of that work in some kind of mechanism like a token or a reputation, and that can be something that we can use. So I think we actually need a token that automatically accrues value for gardening the commons. And if we think about just start something very specific as code, and even more specific, Web3 code. If everybody's using GitHub, or Radical, if you say that if you're going to work on this repo, I need you to actually sign your commits. So we all know that you can have signed commits. If you enforce signed commits, then we know for a fact this identity signed this commit and wrote this much. If we did all of that, then we could automatically, every push, every commit, take all of that work and assign the value to a token and attach that token to that identity in a Soulbound token. And then and people always ask me, if you have an idea about a Soulbound token, what happens to people who are pseudonymous? I don't think Soulbound tokens stop you from being pseudonymous. And I don't want to, does everybody know what Soulbound tokens are? Like, it's literally tied to your human identity. So even if you're pseudonymous, maybe there's some kind of mechanism for figuring out, authenticating that identity while still hiding the part that is human. Assuming such a thing actually even existed. So this thing, we've all decided as a community, we've written all the rules of figuring out how to actually, so all the challenges are here. First of all, if somebody writes code, how do you measure the impact of that code? That's a problem you have to solve. It's not just about the number of lines that somebody pushed to a repo or the number of lines that they remove from a repo. There needs to be much more research done on how to actually measure the true value of the code that was committed to a larger code base. assuming you could get over all those hurdles, and we could actually truly measure it, and now they're accruing reputation that is proportional to their impact on that code base. How do you actually fund such a token? And one of the things that I think we can actually take from Google and all of these people is every project that is a commercially viable for-profit project should commit 1 to 3 to 5% of either their equity or their profits to fund into this token treasury. Now, that's a big ask, but we need someone whose job it is to be the full-time evangelist, shaking people down, guilt-tripping them into making this occur. Because if you can do this, what you want to create is a form of an endowment. An endowment that just perpetually funds itself. Something like Harvard. Harvard has so much money, they will never run out of money because their endowment has grown so big. They are the first major big university in the United States. They existed for over 200 and something years, and they've been funding that endowment since then. We, as a Web3 community, can actually have something like an endowment. We have so much money in the treasuries, but we are not using them in a way that is going to really help us. So let's say you could actually have this endowment and then get all this money into something. Then there's also the data challenge. How do we actually make sure that we are running the servers correctly in the right way to truly, truly trace all the work that everybody has done? It's not just in a GitHub repo, it's in a GitLab repo, it's in Radical, it's in all this. And then you have to run all that data backward compatibility. So it's not just start capturing data from today and all the developers that are alive today. You want to roll it all the way back to genesis of whatever that system is to capture it. So that is also going to limit, because somebody's going to say, I was part of the first crew that wrote Linux, and I never wrote anything else again. But that piece of code that I've written is lost in the ether. And now Linux runs the whole world. If you're funding the commons, I think I should get $10 billion. And they might be right, but we need to be able to capture that data. So if all of this sounds interesting to you, what I want is, I don't want to build this. I'm not interested in building this. I want you to build this, to be excited to build this. And I want to be your advisor because I would like this to exist within 2 to 4 years so that our company, Fimeo, could then say we're going to put a percentage of maybe our profits or equity into this. But we want it to be done by somebody else externally to us. This is not what I want to build. But I know that this is something that ought to exist. So I'm here at Finding the Commons to gift this idea to you all and to encourage you to really think about building this. And if you want to build it, come find me. I'll advise you. I'll help you get it off the ground. And I can just download all the information I know about everything that has worked in the past, everything that has not worked in the past, and the token mechanism design that I have built out. And maybe you can then improve upon it and then roll it out. So with that, thank you.